Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, which is all about the state of scientific purchasing 2021. So we spent the last couple of months surveying people who are making scientific purchases so that we could present key findings in the market report, which we'll be releasing today. And so we could share those findings with people who are selling and marketing into these markets, so our audience. We're going to go through some of those key findings and also get insight from both the scientific purchasing and selling side of things from our two guests today. Our goals are very simple for today's session. We want to share the findings with you and also hopefully get you thinking about at least one aspect of your marketing strategy. We want to leave you with something to get you thinking and to take away and implement. You'll be able to download the full market report during the session at any time by checking out the handouts. And before we introduce the speakers, I just want to run through a few housekeeping. So the webinar is being recorded, isn't it, Sarah? That's right. Yes, we are being recorded. So we'll be sending this out in the next 24 hours. So keep your eyes open to your email. We have got a couple of Q&A sessions. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So please share your thoughts and comments with us at any time using the Q&A box and participate in the polls we'll be running today. As normal, if you have any tech issues, just communicate with our team and we will try to get you back up and running as quickly as possible. So absolutely delighted today. Frankie and myself from Maison Network are going to be co-hosting / presenting. We're joining you I'm in Manchester, Frankie's in Macclesfield. And then our two special guests joining us first from Ontario in Canada. We've got Sarah, who's going to be giving her perspective as a previous scientific seller. And Benedetta is joining us from Connecticut, and she's going to be sharing her perspectives as a scientific purchaser. So we've got Manchester, Macclesfield, Connecticut, Ontario. We'd love to know where you guys are joining us from. So if you could share that with us in the Q&A box. It's always just nice for people to say hello and for us to get a good idea of where people are watching the webinar. Quickly, whilst people are doing that, we're going to run through the agenda. So we're going to look first at the content influence. Then we've broken that down by age. So we're going to be looking at how the different age groups can be influenced through the various channels. Then, oh, great, Montreal, Switzerland, Cambridge, a place I can't even pronounce, Rickmansworth, don't know where that is, Massachusetts. Great to see that so many people are joining us across the world. We're going to break into the first Q&A session at that point. So please, if you do have questions at any point, do share them in the Q&A box. Then we'll be touching on contact with the vendor, a little bit on social media influence, and then a second Q&A. So please do share your thoughts with us at any time. Anytime a question comes up, stick it in the Q&A box and we'll try to address as many as possible. So before we get started, we want to ask you a question. So Frankie and myself have been in the office a couple of times recently, so we're getting back to some sort of normality. Sarah's permanently works from home, if that's right, isn't it? And Benedetta, yep. You were just saying before that you've been in the office basically most of the year. So let us know what you're doing. So a poll will be coming on your screen now. Are you working full-time, part-time, or still working from home? We'd love to know what people are doing. And whilst you're answering that, I'm going to hand over to Frankie, who's going to talk a little bit about who's taken this survey.
Yeah, just for Paul from Rickmansworth, I'll just say London. That is Danny, just to educate.
Okay. Which is south of Manchester at Benedetta, as we were saying earlier.
Oh, got it.
Saying that Manchester is a suburb of London. Anyway, thanks for that intro, Danny. So just really quickly on who took the survey. We're looking at application scientists, engineers, people in the field, people in the laboratory. We had over 100 people working from scientific companies who are involved in scientific purchasing. And the purpose of the survey really is just understanding purchasing behavior in more detail. Specifically, we're looking at things like price and age of buyers, at the risk of being ageist, but people are influenced in different ways, whether that's via search engines or websites or social media. In a lot more of the younger generations are influenced via those channels. But we're going to take a look at how people are influenced there. So without further ado, we're going to jump straight into the different types of content that's available now and how that influences people. So unsurprisingly, product information influences or has an influence or a strong influence on 98% of people. So that's your product specs. I'd love to meet the 2% of people who say that product information does not influence them, but you always get a few of them on the internet. Equally, application notes are second there, with around about 82% of people who are influenced by application notes. So we're ultimately human at the end of the day. People buy from humans. People buy your stories. People buy your application stories, your white papers. The information and how your product is not just product features and benefits. It's more about how that product will solve your problems in a professional setting. And then things like videos and webinars are increasing from the last time we did this survey, with lots, significant portions of people being influenced by those. Interestingly, the podcasts are creeping up. So something that didn't appear last time is now, 25% of people say that podcasts have an influence on their purchasing decisions. So that's to me, that's fascinating. I mean, I'm a big fan of the podcast and the walk, particularly during some of our harsher British lockdowns, when all you can do is you get an hour's yard time, and you basically put a podcast on and learn about something whilst you go and do your rec time. So just to open this up to Benedetta, you're currently a research assistant at Yale University. You had a wonderful example of some purchases that you've been involved in recently. How do you view the different content types as influencing you as a part of a buying team and part of a lab?
So I definitely think that for our experience so far, the application notes and product information were really important, especially once we got really close to making that final decision to purchase those items. But I definitely can see the potential for things like podcasts, especially just because I myself listen to a lot of podcasts, and I can see how that could have an influence on like my buying decision, at least in just kind of expanding my scope of view of what companies to shop around with.
So what sort of stuff do you listen to on podcast?
I listen to a nice little mix of things. So I like some political ones, but there's also a lot of science podcasts that have come out. There's a new one called Unexplainable, which I really like. It kind of it's not just like healthcare topics. It's really just like any type of general science question that has no real answer. So those types of things, I think, finding out the different techniques that people are using to try to answer those questions, I think that has a huge potential for a lot of companies to just kind of include whatever the instrument was that they used to kind of get closer to answering those questions.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. And Sarah, so Sarah works for Inside Scientific, our webinar partners. I believe you've got a podcast in the making. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, we do. So our podcast is called #ShareScience, and we are currently working on one version of that, one type of episode, which is called Expert Answers. And so this is an example of how we repurpose our webinar content. So these podcast episodes are the clippings of the webinar audio into a Q&A. So just the Q&A portion with a slight intro and a slight outro for each episode. So they range from 5 minutes to 20 minutes, depending on how long the Q&A is. And it's a really great resource for people who either didn't have a chance to watch the live webinar or they had to slip out before the Q&A session happen, so they can just log back in and listen to that Q&A if they're interested. So that's our current podcast. And then we are going to be launching one at some point this year called Industry Insights, which will be interviews and stuff like that with companies like everyone that's watching, people who sell equipment in the space, and people who make products for preclinical research and stuff like that. So that's kind of the current plan.
Yeah, excellent. And I think from a marketing perspective as well, we've got a lot of marketers on the call. I listen to podcasts on the walk, and it's interesting to see now you have companies that target marketers. So things like Salesforce, Monday.com, Twilio, even like the sort of app connector integrating and integrations and connections. they're becoming more mainstream and sponsoring like very mainstream podcasts, and that is intriguing. So whilst the content is there to engage the user, the brands and the companies aren't far behind. So Sarah, whilst we have you, how have you seen webinars? I mean, webinars is your day to day. What I suppose, how busy have you been? That's the question.
We're drowning over here, but in a good way. We've got so many companies coming to us asking for webinars, which is a great problem to have. But the companies that we already work with regularly are doing more. They are fully embracing the online presence and just going full steam ahead with their online content and their webinars, which is really awesome. So we're happy, and hopefully our customers are happy. But yeah, we've gotten so busy in the last year. It's crazy.
Yeah, cool. And just to take this opportunity to say, if you have any questions or any comments on anything that you see today, please just drop it in the question box there. We've got a couple of Q&As lined up, so we just want to really make this as interactive and engaging as possible. So we're looking at content influence. We're moving on. 59% of those surveys said webinars had an influence on their buying decision. We're going to look at an idealized customer journey, the content funnel now. So now typically this is, well, disclaimer, journeys don't always look like this, but if we were to have to put people in boxes, I think it always does help whenever you create a new piece of content to say, right, whereabouts does this sit in an ideal journey? I don't know if you can see that on right at the top, just above where it says website, you've got the different channels, and this is how we're looking to engage people on the different channels and then bring them into your content funnel. So as you educate them from an anonymous persona who might not necessarily have heard of you, through to a cookied returning visitor, all the way through to a lead, a marketing qualified lead, as they consume more of your content, and then hopefully the end game is a revenue generating opportunity, and then a client who goes on to buy and have a great relationship with you. So what we're looking at there was 28% of buyers were influenced by podcasts. So again, that's a new channel that brands are trying to own. So what are you doing? In fact, I know that Paul from Rickmansworth, I'll give him a shout out here. I've listened to the to your podcast on it's from Hell Group, isn't it? Feel free to chip in if you're still there. But yeah, it's great to see how all these different channels are now like complementing and adding to the customer journey. So it might be that you have a salesperson at a trade show, for instance, and they engage with a customer in a face-to-face visit. Now that customer might never have heard of you before, but after the salesperson follows up with an email and say a link to your podcast or a link to a webinar or an ebook, that the process then begins, and we're able to bring them into the funnel and say we've got a cookie on them. We can then retarget them with YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook advertising. If they sign up to the blog, we can then start to educate them in and around their stories and their problems and how we solve those problems. Up until we get to that sort of decision-making content, there's always different ways that you can engage and interact with your customers. And we're just going to move it on to looking at lead qualification now as you get further down that funnel. So as marketers, we'd love it if the fish jumped right in the boat. If we could just magic sales qualified leads out of thin air. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work like that. So on the lead qualification matrix here, we've got on the x-axis, we've got intent, with low intent on the left-hand side, high intent on the right side. So you might have page views or ebook downloads as a relatively lower form of intent. And then on the as you increase the intent, you've got webinar registrations. Someone might sit down for an hour and watch a webinar. And then right on the right-hand side, we've got demo booked, request for quote, request for proposal. We want to speak to you now. So we're increasing that intent as we go down the x-axis. And then on the y-axis, we've got the ideal customer profile. So the higher you go, the more ideal the customer profile. In this instance, multinational enterprises is good for us. So we're looking for as many AAs, or if not AAs, ABs or ACs as possible. But this is a nice way of of categorizing what your leads look like, or what the people who are looking for information look like, without bundling them all into just passing them off to a sales team and basically annoying the sales team, because it's a real pick and mix variety of all sorts of quality. And I think we're just going to hand over to Danny now.
Yep. Cheers, Frankie. So in the ebook, you'll see that we've broken down all the different channels and the influence levels by age. And we've done that for a couple of reasons. One of which, if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, is because more often than not, there's more than one person involved in the buying decision. Benedetta, we talked a little bit the other day about your previous, or the fact that you're in the market for a microscope potentially. And cue all the people who sell microscopes adding you on LinkedIn. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going to go into, how many people will be involved in that decision to make the purchase, and a little bit about how the journey will be?
Sure. So right now I'm in a lab that has 2 other lab members besides myself, not including the principal investigator or PI. So I'm really the one who's been pushing for the microscope, just because I do a lot of histology and I mainly do the animal work. So I like to just do the IHC myself and those types of things. So I've really been pushing for that. And even though I feel like I would probably use it more often than the other people, just because when it comes to animal work, you have so many slides, and it's just a lot of heavy microscope use that you would need for it. But so I feel like I would have a majority of the opinion in it, but my other 2 lab mates would definitely also be using it for their cell work. So it's definitely a group effort, but I think it definitely takes everyone to kind of come together, especially for those big ticket items.
Yeah, so we've broken it down by age so that marketers can see how to target the different team members within those departments, like Benedetta. We'll look at a couple of examples today. So search engines were overwhelmingly influential. So 81% of people were influenced by search engines. Interestingly, the highest was the 25 to 35 bracket, 80%, but then also the slightly older, the 56 to 65 age bracket was the second most influenced by search engines. So we all know it's important to be found on Google, Bing, etc., for our sort of keywords to do with our products. But quite often what's forgotten is the long tail keywords, so the questions, the common issues people have when they're going through the research process. Sarah, you touched on a little bit about breaking up your webinars into the Q&As, which is a great way of ranking for those sorts of questions. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of the process that we do when we clip our audio from our webinars into these expert answers episodes is that we also transcribe the questions from the Q&A, so that if anybody searches that question, that our podcast description has those questions in it, but then is also chapterized. So if somebody searches that question, finds the podcast episode, and then wants to only hear that response, they can click that question and it'll take them to the part in the episode where that answer will come through. So that's one way that we do it. And then we also make sure that our description for the episode is quite clear and has a link back to the original webinar, so that if anybody watches or listens to that podcast episode and then says, man, I kind of wish I saw the presentation, they can go back to that webinar very easily. They don't have to search for it. They just click a link and it moves them back to the main content page on our website. And then that allows people to register for the webinar, or if they already registered, they can just click the button and it'll send them to a login page. So that's what we do to help with that aspect of our podcast.
So just being as relevant as possible, making it as easy as and sort of least no resistance whatsoever for the user to find exactly what they're looking for, and also get your pages on your site ranking higher. So that's a really good tip for anyone who's looking to rank higher for their sort of long tail keywords. The other channel that we looked at we're going to talk about now is the manufacturer's website. Unsurprisingly, 90% of people are also influenced by that. And the graph interestingly shows the strength of that influence decreasing with age. which we put down to a few things: less time for people to build up long-term relationships with purchasers, perhaps a little bit less brand loyalty the younger you are, and possibly more open to shopping around. Benedette, we spoke the other day about the brand loyalty side of things, and not just in scientific purchasing, but in general, the younger demographic tends to lose affiliation with a brand as soon as something goes wrong, and it's very hard to win that back. But do you think within the sort of scientific purchasing area, people are more willing to shop around the younger they are? What about you? Are you more willing to shop around, for example?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I really don't. And also has to do with the fact that I've just been doing research for about like 5 years, I think, altogether. So I think just that shorter amount of experience that I have with just a handful of brands, especially because I've come from smaller labs, you know, I'm familiar with some, but I'm not really like married to them, if you will. So yeah, I mean, I've seen that a lot of smaller brand companies will also have really good products, but I also just have an idea that, for example, I used to use a Zeiss microscope. Maybe I should look into a Zeiss when we're ready to buy one. So things like that. I'm just more flexible, I think, than probably some of the older people, especially PIs. They're more so just like, these are people with like 30 plus years of research. They're more like, no, this is the microscope that I use. I've always used this one, and that's the one that we're going to buy if we're going to buy a new one. So I've definitely seen that myself, and other people around my age are more flexible for sure.
And have you been able to influence those people who have the sort of long-term affiliation with one particular manufacturer, or are they pretty set in their ways?
So both of my PI, like my primary PIs, they've been between like 40 and 50 years old. So I think that they're more trusting of the people in the lab, and they're more so to the sense that even if they did have a brand in mind, if I, for example, went to my PI and said, no, this is really good, this is what I need, I'll be the one using it, right? Or whoever in the lab will be using it rather than the PI. So even if it might not be a brand that they were familiar with before, I think that they 9 times out of 10 will trust their lab members enough to just kind of go forward and believe that, all right, it looks useful, they say it's useful, I want it to be used, so they'll just allow us, even if they did probably have another idea in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we take away from those things is that obviously being found on search engines is really important, and the quality of what you're putting out on your website is going to be the key. So if you haven't recently reviewed your SEO strategy for not just your keywords, but your long tail, do that. Does your website provide the answers to those common questions and problems? Are you optimized for everything you want to be optimized for? If this is something you need a bit of help with, in the handout section, you'll find a link to get a free SEO review. One of our team will do that in the next couple of days. So if that's something that interests you, head over to the handouts and you'll be able to do that. A couple of other things to think about whether or not your site's optimized for conversions. Are you making very easy for users to find what they're looking for, but also take the next action? And then what does that journey look like for them from there? So have you mapped out the whole sales and marketing journey? Is it aligned? Can you improve that in any way? So that's some things for the audience to think about. We are going to move into our first Q&A, but before we take some audience questions, I actually have a question which we do touch on in the ebook, but I wanted to ask Sarah, from your point of view, as when you were selling scientific equipment, did you publish the pricing on your website?
Oh,
No.
No,
it was not published on our website. You always had to request a quote to get it, but most of that stemmed from the fact that the equipment that we sold was very modular. So depending on your application, you required like a bunch of different options. And so by putting just like a base price of something, it's sort of misleading, because most applications for that particular piece of equipment, and this applied to almost everything that we sold, it wasn't just like, this is the price, you know. There were a lot of different add-ons that you not just needed, but wanted if you were doing a specific application. So the prices were never published.
Okay.
Interesting on that one. Sorry, Danny, to jump in.
Yeah.
a good book that we've all read at AZO is They Ask You Answer, which is basically talking about the importance of getting as much information out online as possible about your product and your company. And it's something where we publish our prices, we publish the rate card. I know it's not for everybody, and there is that sort of like, well, what if the competitors see it? But I'm pretty sure if they wanted it, they could probably get hold of your pricing anyway. The other point to the modular sort of side of things is, when you go and buy a new car, if you're buying a Mercedes-Benz, you'll have an indicative price, and that's not necessarily the price you're going to be paying, because there's going to be a load of extras and bolt-ons. So it is a really interesting debate about, I don't know how other people in the audience feel about that. Maybe you've got more of a sort of commoditized product or something that can be sort of like, sold off the shelf or out the box. But we're certainly, we see a lot of value in smoothing the path and just not getting in our own way when it comes to pricing. So, I mean,
I'd agree from like a buyer's point of view. It's just useful to kind of have an idea. I think everyone kind of assumes that that's not going to be the real price anyways, but just kind of having like a ballpark number, I think it's useful, especially once we're getting ready to really bring that to our PI, because we'll obviously do a lot of the back-end research before we really give him something that we're really interested in. So I think the first thing that he'll ask us is, how much is it? So if I have an idea,
he needs to know how many zeros it's got on the end.
For sure. Yeah, exactly. So, and that'll kind of help, like seeing his reaction will kind of give us an idea. All right, this is too much, or this is not too bad. So I think for us, it's a little bit helpful, at least just getting some sort of idea of how much it would cost, especially for these big items. You just never know.
Yeah, cool. So just looking down, now is a great time for a Q&A, because it says Q&A on the screen. So encourage people to get their questions in whilst more questions are coming in. There's one from Andrew Jones here. I think, Sarah, you probably best, have you seen this one in the published bit? If companies are doing a lot more webinars, are you seeing a drop off in the engagement per webinar? Are customers getting webinar fatigue?
It's actually the opposite. Yes, I think certain people are getting webinar fatigue, but if you tune into the last episode of this webinar series, you'll learn a little bit more about how to prevent that from happening to your viewers. But in general, I think a lot of people have they've just accepted that this is life now, and that webinars are a thing, and that if you want to learn about products and about certain applications, that there's very likely a webinar for you. And just doing a quick Google will show you that. I think doing more webinars doesn't necessarily equate to creating more content. It's about how you do your webinars. So creating interactive webinars that are really about the science and about the applications are going to be the best way to keep your audience from getting webinar fatigue, and also being really honest about what the webinar is actually about. If you have a specific application, don't just say, learn more about this product. Go into the details, link the presenters, make a very large piece of content that's consumable throughout the whole process, from pre-registration, where they're just learning about the webinar, give them things to click on, give them profiles to read about the presenters. And then if they've decided that they're interested in that webinar based on the description that you've got on your website or on the registration form, that's great. Hit them with more little pieces of content that are consumable, snack size, previews of what they're about to see, interviews with the speaker, not necessarily about the webinar topic, but stuff like that. I think, yes, we are getting more webinars, but the webinars are also getting better. People are really learning how to create this content and how to make it so that by the end of it, you're not like, oh, I can't get that hour back. I regret signing up. Do you know what I mean? So really focusing on creating interactive and interesting content is the best way to prevent webinar fatigue, and not necessarily just doing less webinars, but doing better webinars, if not more and better.
Yeah. And I think coming up with original, unique ideas it's hard to come up with unique content ideas. The survey, we've done a couple of surveys on market. We surveyed marketing managers. We've surveyed people purchasing scientific products and equipment. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of resources to try to accomplish this and to pull it off. So what we do is, we will plan the survey, but then we will plan a webinar around it. Then from the webinar, we'll get 6 salient points. You'll see them over the next week as we chop this webinar up and put it out on social. So there'll be people who aren't here today, who will view this on LinkedIn and think, oh, I must check that webinar out. There's also an ebook. We'll get onto the handouts in a minute. There's also blog pieces. There's all sorts, and we can, I think, in some instances, we can even turn it into a podcast. But it's just being smart with your content, repurposing, re-engineering, reduce, reuse, recycle on the content.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of effort to get this content, these ideas. So make it work for you.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little treat coming up in terms of one of our new creative videos, which Danny will share with us. Okay. Another question here on, that was the webinar fatigue one, about video from Jesse Harris. So this is similar. There's a pretty big variance between technical webinars to YouTube clips. So we did actually have video as a separate one to webinars, but they are both, they're both seen as important. I think webinars with 58%, videos was more important than that even. But it's just about having a unique piece of content, having a message, and displaying it as we will see later. We've got Paul, a pitch for the Modern Chemistry podcast. We'll give that a shout out. Thanks, Paul. And then Randy talking about the old school mail, so product postcards. How do they compare to e-marketing during this COVID time? So like sending baskets and sending things, I think, it seems like there is a better chance of customers reading a postcard than reading an email. In the past, print media has been declining with respect to online marketing. I think just generally, I think digital marketing has accelerated by 5 years. It would have been 2025 before we got to where we are now, technically. And we're seeing lots of company hiring digital natives and people who can drive digital platform software, content creation, things like Canva, things like Adobe, things like webinar platforms. That if you can't communicate, you're going to lose your competitive advantage.
Just on that, Frankie, we did ask about print during the survey. So when people get hold of the ebook, you can compare print to search engines, manufacturers' websites, etc. And what I think is a good idea is to combine the two. So if you are running webinars, you can always do thank you cards written by hand, send them out to people. It's a very cost-effective way of having a very personalized touch to people. I was on a webinar a couple of weeks ago when they said they were going to send me something and they haven't done. So if you are going to do that, make sure you do, because I'm still a very disappointed customer at the moment. But I think it's a nice way that you can combine sort of old school marketing with the modern digital way. So there's still a place for it, and you can see in the ebook where it ranked in terms of channel influence.
And we've said we're going to do something similar in some of our later webinars, haven't we?
Yes.
So
if people come to all 6, yeah.
A question for Benedetti. Have you read that one, Benedetti? So,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why would you not request a quote from your shortlisted vendors before going to your PI?
I think when I said that, I meant more so in the really just kind of talk, like bringing the idea up to him phase, and just if it's that early on, I think I don't want to waste my time and kind of going back and forth with the vendor, as well as not wasting the vendor's time and trying to get quotes and showing like as if it's real interest when I don't even know if it's really an option. So I think that's why having the price available on the website is good for that really early stage and just kind of getting an idea of what the product offers, and just like how much that would cost. And then once I get an idea of what he's thinking and whether that's feasible or realistic, then I think I would definitely look more into the vendors and just see if they can give us more information that I can give to him, and just kind of saying, oh, remember that microscope that I brought up to you like at last week's lab meeting? Here's more information. Let me know if you want me to schedule a demo or something like that. So, yeah.
And I see a comment in here from somebody who said, the price doesn't always equate to value. And
Mhm.
I think it depends on the type of product that you're selling as well. Like if you're selling a $200,000 microscope, like I don't think that you necessarily need to publish that price on your
Yeah.
website. I think anyone looking at your product probably has some idea of what it's going to cost anyways, at least in a ballpark, saying, it's definitely going to be over 100,000. So not necessarily like publish all your prices, but I think it's just more that like if you're going to have a product that's modular but also more inexpensive, for example, like an anesthesia system, it's like there's not that many working parts. The price won't change that much depending on your application. You can do like a starting at price and just say basically like this is going to cost you more than 5,000. So if that's not in your budget, then like it was nice to meet you type situation. And again, like just be careful about putting price on there and then disappointing people by saying like, oh yeah, that's the price that's online, but in order to do your application, you need to spend an extra 10 grand type situation. I think to avoid that, there are strategic ways to put your pricing up without scaring people away, but then also without giving them a low ball. And then, when you give them an actual quote, it's like sticker shock. So just something to keep in mind if you're going to publish your prices.
Cool. A few last questions. Keep the questions coming in. I think we'll just really quickly, how do you hotkey the podcast by a specific question? I think I understand what that means. Sarah?
Yeah, totally. So we use a program called Buzzsprout to get our podcast out to all of the different places that you can get a podcast. And within Buzzsprout, you can hotkey or chapterize your episode. That may or may not translate to the program that people get their podcast from. So for example, Apple Podcasts, if you click on the description, you can see the chapters. If you're using it on Spotify, then you won't see the chapters. Even though they're in there, they won't kind of translate over.
But you can chapterize on Vimeo. That's something that we do.
Mm-hmm.
You Vimeo and you just hover over the timeline. There's lots of different bits that you can fast forward to.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is a nice way of doing it. Any suggestions for soliciting application notes? It's just disappeared. I think that's part of relationship building. If you have really good clients that you go to. Benedetti, have you ever been asked for an application note or from a vendor or even like a customer testimonial or a case study type thing?
No, because I haven't been like the primary person for a big purchase that's gone through. Like for example, the last microscope that I bought in my last lab, I wasn't the primary contact person for that vendor. So I've never really been asked directly, but I'm sure the PI or the person who was in that lab who really was contacting with the vendor has probably been asked. Yeah, I haven't been directly, but I think the application note is definitely useful, especially for certain items like microscopes.
Cool. And last one, do you feel there's danger of content fatigue through too much repurposing of a certain webinar or white paper? I do not feel that. I think if you think that everybody who matters has seen your content, then you're wrong, because there's so much noise out there in the internet. You've got to tell them again, whether that's via social, whether it's via email, whether it's at their point of search when they're actually looking for a particular solution. Don't forget, you can clip these videos up and optimize them for search as well. So if it's modern chemistry, or if it's digital marketing, or if it's analytical chromatography, and you're creating video content around that, embed those videos in your blog pieces, embed them in your app notes, embed them in anything where they're relevant, and you will see the SEO benefit. So I'd say repurpose, reuse, and recycle. Probably a good time to move on. Keep the questions coming in. That was a really nice little Q&A session. Moving back to the sort of loose presentation that we have here, looking at what stage did you speak with the vendor? So we've kind of touched on this already. But those top two categories for when research began and after conducting research, that's almost 40%, or it's over 40% of people reaching out to vendors during this stage. So you're thinking, after conducting research, what are you doing? Are you even in the frame? Are you even on the team sheet? Are you being considered as a brand? And then you look at the third one down, after creating a list of vendors. So imagine somebody's created a list of vendors and you're not on the team sheet. That's kind of where we're at. It's a big brand awareness play. How are you front and center? How are you solving problems for your customers on a daily basis? How are you, are you sponsoring the podcast, or are you, are you visible on social media with nice little laboratory tips or nice little engineering in the field bits? It's about building up your brand equity there in the field. A couple of big stats on the left-hand side here. So 51% had made a purchase from their vendor of choice previously. Really quickly on that, it's much easier to keep a customer, to retain a customer, than it is to generate a new customer. So yeah, obviously brand affinity and brand loyalty does have something to show for there. And then 82% said a peer recommendation was important to them. I'm going to come to you, Benedetti, about we had a practice session before, but you told us about a nice little story about when a peer basically said, "Oh, have you tried this pipette?"
Sure. Yeah. So we had just like some money that we had to spend really quickly. So I was just trying to figure out what it is that could possibly be useful, and I just remember that someone had showed me a pipette from Eppendorf, I believe, that they had used, and it's just like a single pipette, and it has tips that, I mean, you can buy a couple of different sizes of tips, but for example, a 10 ml tip. And what's really useful about that is that specific pipette is that I can, on the digital face, I can say, oh, I want this tip to dispense 100 microliters every time. So for things like an ELISA or any other thing that uses a 96-well plate, especially when you have 96 samples in that plate, which is not always the case, but it's so tiresome to just go up and down and up and down, and even remember whether you even added something or not. So just having something that not only do I know that is just easier, that I don't have to go back and forth every single time, but also just having that much more confidence that I'm really just, everything is having an equal volume, just makes me more confident in my results. And it just makes my life easier. But it was definitely, if someone didn't show me that pipette, I wouldn't have known about it, just because I'm so used to just the regular pipette that everyone uses. So yeah, peer recommendations definitely have a huge like impact in these types of decisions. And luckily, just because we had the money that we had to spend, I just ordered it right from the Eppendorf site, and it came a few days later, and it's been super useful. Yeah.
So good user experience as well plays into that. It was just a quick in and out on e-commerce, and you've got it a few days later. So,
yeah, and I didn't even know sorry to cut you off, but I didn't even know the name of the pipette. I just knew that it did this thing. So just kind of Googling the pipette, whatever it was. I think I knew that it was Eppendorf though. So, but I was able to find exactly what I needed very quickly. So that was very good also.
Yeah. So Sarah nodding in agreement.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the best way to get a peer recommendation without actually knowing that your potential customer has peers that use your product is to get application notes or white papers from actual users, because that's essentially, the currency of scientists is data. And so if they don't directly know the person that's published the white paper, they've probably heard of them if they're in the same field. So if you don't directly know people at your institution, but you're looking around online and you see white papers come up and a name on the white paper that you recognize from other journal articles, I think can mimic that, close peer recommendation as well.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's move it on to the next slide. So looking at thought leadership here, and I suppose it's almost an extension of peer-to-peer. You look up to your peers, and but if there's a particular thought leader that you follow, there's an interesting, a really interesting story that we had. There was a Phenom World microscope that we went to film basically, And there was he was called Sir Professor Colin Humphreys from the University of Cambridge. He was an advanced materials god. He basically was, he talked about advanced materials and everybody listens. And he was talking about the great work of advancing science and how it's used in aerospace, in space, NASA, in automotive, in medical devices. It goes into people's hips, talking about how, analyzing materials and analyzing them for properties and how you can use them in all these different applications. And then he was just sort of said this whilst he was stood next to the Phenom World microscope, and just saying how important it is to get everybody excited by these scientific applications and how to get people from college and school into these professions. And it was priceless. Like it had over 100,000 views on that video, and it was just a real sort of thought leadership video that was it was thought leadership doing its thing. So I remember it now, and I've never been in a lab, but I can tell you it's a Phenom World scanning electron microscope. So it's had an effect on me. Imagine what it had an effect on if you worked in advanced materials, and it goes across industries. So looking at this, we have about 48% people saying thought leadership is important, and then about 16% saying it's very important. So add those up, 64%, I think. But we can also see, when we add that in conjunction with good customer service, I think customer service is becoming even more important nowadays, because if you don't have the user experience plays into that as well. If you don't have good customer service and good, a good customer success team, then you're losing competitive advantage to the 10 other vendors who do have that. So I think that's a really important point to make. And of course, it all starts with content. And 97% of people say the quality of the content was important or very important for vendors. Benedetti, just before we move on, how much do you agree or disagree with those kind of statements?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that good customer service is a huge factor. Just one experience off the top of my head is that I was just looking for an antibody for a flow cytometry experiment, which I really didn't have much experience with at the time. So I was able to connect with someone who currently, I can't remember the name of the company off the top of my head, but she currently works for the company, but she was a previous postdoc at Yale as well. So she was just able to not only tell me which antibody was better, but then also recommend another product from her company. And just kind of give me a really nice layout of what the protocol would be. And just having someone so knowledgeable was really helpful for that decision. And also just someone who was nice enough to, go that extra mile, even though I'm sure there's some benefit for her and for the company, obviously, in recommending another product. It just made my work a little bit better. So it just goes both ways. And having someone that you trust and has the experience, that can give you really valuable advice. It definitely makes me want to go back to the same woman next time I have even any type of experiment that might involve something she could help me with. So
that seems that trust and that relationship that you have with the vendor there. So what else would you say differentiates customers? Say we're in a competitive marketplace where there's several, maybe a dozen or even more vendors who are offering similar sorts of products. How do those vendors differentiate themselves?
I think, if I'm thinking in terms of this type of antibody type situation, there's plenty of companies that I bought who sell antibody from. So I think having someone who's really knowledgeable about it, but also having those application notes. For example, I do a lot of IHC, but not all antibodies have been validated for IHC. So having someone, even if it hasn't been validated, just being able to give me the information, no, we don't know if this will work, but this is a good way to start. So those types of things, just having someone who really knows what they're talking about really helps, just because if that's the only antibody available and I don't know where to start and no one's there to kind of guide me in the right direction, one, I would probably look elsewhere. And two, if that's my only option, I'm going to have to spend so much time trying to figure out how this antibody can work properly for my experiments. And just calibrating dilutions is just not something that I want to focus all of my energy on. So just having help and having someone who's willing to help and is nice about it. There's sometimes you don't always get the best technical support, but having good technical support is really helpful too. So it all goes back to good customer service. Absolutely.
Cool. All right. That's a comprehensive answer. Please keep your questions coming in. We're going to have another Q&A shortly. But before then, how would you rate your site's overall UX? So we're talking about, how do people use your site? The user experience is what it is. So I'll answer that there. Danny, just whilst people are answering that, we've got two types of site. We've got 12 sites actually on AZO Network. We've got let's take AZO Life Sciences and AZO Network. How would you rate our site's overall UX?
Yeah, so AZO Life Sciences is the newest website of the family, and it probably provides the best user experience. So it's a news-first site. Very easy for the people who are interested in the subject to find exactly what they're looking for. The latest articles are always published first. It's broken down into categories. It's a very well-organized scientific blog. AZO Network, so I'm relatively new to the company, and one of the things I noticed that others who perhaps hadn't, because I was looking at it with fresh eyes, is that the site is very much solutions first rather than resources first. We're always telling people about having the content and informing your buyers as much as possible. So I think moving forward, we should be looking at putting our blogs, podcasts, these webinars front and center, so that the people on this call and other people similar to them can get access to that what is hopefully good content really as easily as possible. But having said that, and I know we spoke about it before, Frankie, managing a website redesign, if anyone's done it before, is a complicated process. It's a long process, requires expertise. If you try just to do little bits at a time, it ends up not aligning and you'll soon mess up your site. So it does require a lot of thought that goes into it before you take on a site redesign. So, but interesting to see people, how they're rating their own sites. A lot of people giving it themselves 20%, 8 out of 10, which is good.
Yeah, not many in the 9 or 10, only 4% above.
Where did you rank AZO Network, Frankie?
I went 8. I was probably more of a 7, really. It's one of those where it's a big project, and it's something that I know we need to get around to, because we updated it maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and now it's one of those. I'm going to get around to it, but it's a bit of a headache at the minute. I'm sure lots of people in the audience are in a similar sort of position, and it's just ironic that we actually do this for companies. But you'd see the carpenter always has the wonky table, I think is the expression here. So I think, is it you, Danny, taking it on now?
There was a little bit about UX, but I think we've cut enough of that. We'll run through this quickly so we can get to some more Q&A. So we ran this similar survey a couple of years ago, and there's been a slight increase in the influence of social media. So over a third of people now say social media influences their buying decision. The graph on the right shows the different channels that people use and how the influence affects them. Benedette, we were talking the other day about a channel that doesn't appear on there and that you're using at the moment, which is TikTok. Can you tell us a bit about how you use TikTok?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a quarantine download, but I mean, I found a way to enjoy it. So, I mean, I use it for a lot of different things. I mean, it's definitely just something to see silly videos, but I mean, you learn a lot of things on there. And just in terms of science areas specifically, especially things that I would use personally, one thing is that I've seen like a pathologist, and she goes through just kind of just answering people's questions. Oh, what does this look like? What does this look like under a microscope? But then there was another one that I saw, and it was someone who was measuring their antibody concentration with an ELISA kit that they bought, and they were measuring it with their own serum or saliva, one or the other, after being vaccinated, and comparing it with patients from COVID who had recovered. And just, I mean, obviously it was supporting vaccination, but I mean, that's a huge opportunity right there to advertise the kit that they were using for that. I don't know what kit they were using because they didn't include it, but that would definitely be a very good opportunity to show this is how the kits are used if you're looking for kits, this is a website, things like that I think would be very useful. And just TikTok is nice because it's so short. The videos most of the time between like 15 and 60 seconds. And just because the general attention span of people, I think, is generally between 15 and 60 seconds. I think it's nice to kind of get something that will really catch your attention and something that you'd also kind of pay attention to and remember, and just save that video for the future. And especially if it applies to your work, it's very good.
Yeah, absolutely. Frankie, do you want to share your attempt at so before we did this webinar, we tried a new promotion idea, which was we used it on Instagram Reels, which is very similar to TikTok, and Frankie is going to share his work with us.
I was going to say we're a bit tight for time, but
over 100 scientists,
here we go.
researchers and engineering professionals about their scientific purchasing habits. I'll be joined by Danny, Benedette and Sarah as we discuss the latest insights in our State of Scientific Purchasing Survey 2021. We look at how social media, webinars and podcasts.
Oh, there we go. That's enough of that, I think.
That's enough of
You can see the full premiere on LinkedIn and on Instagram. Actually got 1,000 views in the first 24 hours, that did. So
Wow.
I'm a keen advocate of getting out of your comfort zone and trying new things. So,
For sure.
yeah. So I think we'll be doing more of that. But in the meantime, have we got another poll? Just one last poll. I think we're getting close to the top of the hour, Danny.
Yeah, so we'll move on from this poll and we'll just go just quickly before we go into the Q&A. So we are running a webinar purely about social media for science at the end of June. So if it's something you're looking at as a company, please do check that out on azonetwork.com and sign up for that. We'll be talking about advertising, content, and managing your own personal brands on social as well. So a really good session for people who are looking to get more from that. I won't go through this because all the slides are in the handouts as well, so people can download the slides if they want to go through a few other things to think about, as well as downloading the ebook, which is available and coming across your screen any second now. Whilst we're waiting for that, we're going to go back into some more Q&A. So we've got one here from Randy. If you have a good or great customer service, how do you get the message out to your existing companies know it, but to prospects? Frankie, maybe that's more of a question for you.
Yeah, I'd say it's quite hard to do, especially right. Well, maybe not so much right now. Video content, video testimonials. You can. Sorry, my screen's going to turn off. But yeah, video testimonials were case studies where people are talking about your company and how you solve problems for them. Where you've got a good relationship with people, that kind of thing. We've got some fantastic video, clients on video talking about us offering digital marketing solutions for them. It's gold. It's worth its weight in gold. It's gold dust. So that kind of thing. It does require, maybe a bit of planning. But trade shows, we're actually planning our next trade show to go to in July, and we'll be taking a video camera and going to the trade show. You can also do it online, of course, by capturing it like we're doing now. But they are worth their weight in gold when people are talking about real life problems and how you're solving them. Yeah.
You were saying about when we go to events, we record a lot of the videos. It's also a great time to get lots of your podcasts recorded as well. If you want to bulk record them, if you know people are going to be there, you want to appear on your podcast, get them bulk recorded at an event during some of the downtime, and then you've got that content which then can be repurposed over a longer period of time. Benedetta, is a question for you from Joseph asking, as a scientist, you read scientific papers. Would you not consider those scientific papers important sources for purchasing equipment? I imagine that those would weigh even more than product brochures.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a nice way to open up that window and kind of seeing, I mean, definitely the science, publishing a paper is so important, especially publishing in a really good journal is really important, especially people who are not only coming from Yale, but any big institution that you know that they're producing really good quality research. So if I see really nice pictures in there, and I'm like, especially if they're using a similar technique that I've used in terms of staining or something like that, I would definitely look into how they took that picture. Especially because some of these bigger journals, that's what they want. They want like that really nice picture that they can get on the cover and attract people's attention. So it's hard to say which one is more important. They're both really important. As one is important in terms of just introducing me to the piece of technology or whatever it is that we would buy, and then the product brochure is important just because so I know just really how user friendly it is and price, other factors. I think the product brochure is more so when I'm getting close to actually purchasing it, whereas the papers is just kind of introducing me to what's out there.
Perfect. And I think we'll just ask this one last question, and then we'll finish things up from Bindi. He's asking, Benedetta, again for you, where do you ask questions to have assistance with antibody usage or application? Do you Google the question, or do you contact someone you already know?
I mean, it's
a
mix. Yeah, it's a bit of both for sure. Like I said, I think I mentioned this before. I'm pretty much the only one in my lab who's been doing a lot of staining, so it's not really people in my lab that I can turn to for this specific application. But there are other people that I know who also do similar antibody related projects. But I think and you don't want to bother someone while you're at work either. So it's really more so just going to the source, exactly, going to companies that I've shopped with before, especially seeing what antibodies they have, whether it's been tested for my application. So I'd say probably like 60-40 in terms of 60% just going directly to the source and 40% trying to see if someone else has experience with it.
Perfect. I think that's a good place to finish things up. So Benedetta, Sarah, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing everything with the audience today. Thank you to the audience for tuning in. We hope you've got a little bit out of it, and we're leaving with at least one thing to think about after today's webinar. There is, of course, going to be a survey as soon as you leave today, so please take 10 seconds. There's only 2 questions. Please complete that for us if you get the time. Of course, ASO Network can help you out with any of your digital marketing needs. We partner with Sarah to provide great webinars, and we also create, distribute, and analyze digital marketing in the science industry. So do get in touch if we can help you out in any way. Thank you very much, and we'll see you at the next webinar, which is going to be in May, all about running a scientific blog. So take care, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Sounds good.
Thanks, guys.
See ya. Thank you.